Yeah, thanks, Cannon. It's great to be here with everyone, and I'm looking forward to seeing more of you more often. I've got the really challenging task of introducing Stan Kasten, and I've got to tell you, I've got notes like you would not believe here, but I can't get through them all. So let me try it this way. Of course, Stan is the president of the Los Angeles Dodgers, the World Series champion Los Angeles Dodgers, as I'm sure who you'd want us all to know, and that team that broke the hearts of Braves fans just last year. So maybe the Braves will be able to do something about that this year. Now, what's important here is Stan got his start in Atlanta, and his is a very Atlanta-centric story, and we're going to talk about that. And there are just a couple of things I want to mention from these notes that I have. Stan was named the general manager of the Hawks in 1979 when he was 27. He was the youngest general manager in NBA history. And then later on in his career, he was the first person to hold the title of president of three different teams in three different sports: the Braves, the Hawks, and the Thrashers, the hockey team at the time. And oh, by the way, he also was involved with the Washington Nationals and their stadium. So I mean, I could go on, but I'm just going to stop because he is such a great and interesting guy to talk to. So let's get Stan to join us from California. Hey, Stan, good to see you.
Hi, Kevin. Thank you for that eulogy. That was really nice.
So, all right, we're off to a running start, Stan. Now, let's just start. You got your start in Atlanta. So talk about that. What was it like? I mean, a 27-year-old general manager. Are you kidding me? I mean, come on. That would never happen today.
Yeah. It was an interesting time. Could only have happened because I had the world's most unique person as an owner of those teams, Ted Turner. I will say this. I understood very well that unless I worked really hard, and really fast, I could be easily the youngest ex-GM in NBA history. And I was determined to avoid that. And we had great support from ownership, as I have found everywhere in my travels and in my observations. Ownership is the key to everything. We had great ownership in Atlanta during those days, and it was a great time to be involved with all of those teams.
Now, before I forget, Stan, I want to remind all the folks in the audience here that you can use the chat function, however you're watching this, to get questions to us. And we'll get to your questions. I've got a whole bunch, but we're going to leave time. You start putting those questions in there now. We won't waste any time. We'll get to them. But I just got to ask you, Stan, you got to have a favorite memory of each one of those franchises you were involved in, right? I mean, when you tell your stories about each one of them, what's your favorite story?
Well, listen, nothing matters more than winning the World Series in my life, in my world, and in the world, I think, of all of our fans. So that night in October of 1995, well, it was certainly the highlight of many of us in Atlanta in our experiences. It was so long in coming. Remember when I had come to Atlanta and when I was asked to take over the team, we had a really bad reputation. The city of Atlanta had a bad reputation at that time. But when I was asked to take over the team by Ted, we had the highest payroll in baseball and a last place team. That's hard to do if you're trying to do it on purpose. Okay, that's where we were, but we were given the tools that we needed to build for the long term. And that's the key to, I think, any plan for success is the opportunity to build long term. And it finally paid off. We made a number of trips to the World Series, but in 95 winning it was, that tops all of my memories in Atlanta.
I have to let everyone know that I'm a Cleveland Indians fan, and you made note of exactly who the Braves beat in that 95 World Series. So, but I'm over that. I'm not going to be too rough on you in this interview, but we'll get to some.
Would you like to see what a 95 World Series ring looks like, Kevin?
I'd really rather not, Stan, if that's okay with you. But we'll get to a bunch of other things. But you also remain very personally connected to Atlanta, right?
Yeah, I still live there. My family is there. I was home last weekend for a family thing. And I'm lucky enough to be back next week when the Dodgers come to town. So I love Atlanta. I've always loved Atlanta. I've lived there more than 40 years since my very first day working for Ted Turner in 1976.
Well, that's great to hear. Now, obviously, you've had a lot of success, and I know you're kind of modest about it, but I want to press you a little bit on this. So, tell us what it takes in professional sports to be successful versus what maybe fans like us think it takes. What is it really?
Well, I mean, there are books written on all of these subjects. I think when you're building a sports franchise, not just a baseball franchise, but any sports franchise, in fact, any company, I focus on the three things that I think all companies have in common. And that is a focus on their product, a focus on their customer, a focus on their brand. In baseball, that means your team. That means, in a gross oversimplification, your stadium experience. And as far as your brand goes, I think that means your community relations programs, your outreach to your community. We focus on those things all the time. Every single person in all of my organizations has heard this speech to death. They all know the three pillars, and they all know their role in achieving each of these pillars. And if you keep them focused on the mission, which again, we've oversimplified today, but if you keep them focused on that mission, you wind up achieving something good along the way.
Now, what about the people? You mentioned people almost every moment with each question, whether it's the people at the top or the people working for you alongside. What do you look for in particular? I mean, when you have hired people, or the Dodgers look to hire people, or any of the teams you've been part of, what is it? What do you look for in a person?
I know the answer to this one because it really is top of my mind. I look for self-starters, people who have an innate responsibility to get their job done, people who don't need me to call them up every morning and remind them what I need them to do today, people who wake up knowing what they need to do today, wake up knowing if they don't have a tool that they need to get their job done, they come to tell me, I need this to get the job done. That makes everything else easier when you don't have to be looking over everyone's shoulder. Now, I spent the first half of my career as a president GM. You don't see a lot of that anymore. But as such, I was a micromanager, especially when I only had one team. The second half of my career, when I started getting a second team and a third team and other things to do, I became much more of a delegator. And that required a lot of things. It starts with building the correct organizational chart, filling the org chart with the right people. As you say, it always comes back to people. And then finally, making sure your people have the resources to get their job done. Resources means money for sure. It means money, but it also means other things. It means direction. It means support. And especially in sports, more often than not, it also means time. Time to execute a plan. Time where you're not worried about quarter-to-quarter results, where you really can put a longer-term plan in place. I think successful teams that have had sustained success, were able to take advantage of the time necessary to build a long-term plan. We had that in Atlanta. Ted was way too busy doing really important things, world-level things. And he said, Stan, I don't need a lecture, just fix it. And you have the time to do it. That was critical and is underappreciated. When Ted gave us at the Braves time to execute a plan, we went from being a sad sack team, 4 years in the basement, 4 years under 1 million attendance, to a team that won its next 14 divisions.
How about the two markets? In particular, I'm interested in Atlanta versus LA. Does it matter with a sports team? Companies think about where they're located all the time. Sports teams kind of are where they are for the most part. They have to thrive in the market they land in.
Well, there's a lot of difference between Atlanta and LA. My history with each is a little different because both in Atlanta and Washington, we did not have much of a history of success for baseball. Atlanta had been a losing franchise for a number of years. Washington did not even have baseball for 30 some years before I got there. So the luxury of that is we had to build our fans one at a time, and expectations were very low. And we really could tell people we're building for the long term. It's going to take us 4 or 5 years. Please join us now. But if not, come back and see us in 5 years. In LA, I didn't have that advantage. I did have the advantage of an extraordinarily loyal fan base that when you did things right would come out here, 3 million people a year, every year. But the disadvantage there was you couldn't talk to them and say, we are going to be good in 5 years, just hang on. They deserved a team that could compete right now today. And so our mission was to compete right now today because our fans demanded it, expected it, deserved it. But also we want to build a long-term plan. Now, we have resources in this market, fans, tickets, hot dogs, media, sponsorships, that enabled us to do both things at the same time. I can't tell you every market has that advantage. Probably Atlanta and Washington didn't have that. Others don't. But here, and that's why it took time in Atlanta and Washington. But here in LA, we had the advantage of the marketplace that enabled us to be good right away and to continue building on a long-term platform.
Now, you've been involved in stadiums in one form or another in a lot of different ways. So talk about that a little bit. But what I'm most interested in and what I would love people to hear is, like, it's tough. The stadium deals are, they involve a lot more things than just what the team wants to do, I think. So talk about how you've navigated that, apparently very successfully through the years.
Well, thank you. The most, you always have to deal with local communities and local government. But nothing was ever more complicated than building the Olympic Stadium, which became Turner Field, because not only did we have local government, we also had the IOC. So throw that and all of those complications into your ordinarily complicated enterprise, and you could see how tough that is. Just the local stuff was tough. I tell people it was the 6th time someone said to me, Stan, you've got a deal. Till I really had a deal. And that last one was Marty King. He was the city councilman whose approval I needed, the last approval I needed, but we finally had a deal. But it was 6 times along the way I was told you've got a deal before I really had a deal. And it all had to fit into the construct of what Billy Payne and his crew was doing with the IOC, pursuant to IOC and international guidelines. To Billy's eternal credit, he doesn't get enough credit for this. He understood we were building a temporary 19-day Olympic venue, but a long-term stadium, stadium for the ages, which, by the way, served about 50 million people after the games were over. So that was super complicated, but they're all complicated. They all have to work for the communities. No one wants to spend money. I can tell you in California, it's even tougher now because California, in the last 2 decades, hasn't spent public money on venues. That hasn't held us back at Dodger Stadium because, again, the marketplace is such that you can do some things that you can't do in other markets, but they're always complicated. They're always unique. But yeah, you're right, Kevin. They're always complicated.
So we're getting some questions in the chat, but this is one I just I want to ask you because it's been such a big story in Atlanta, and that's the AllStar Game. Major League Baseball made that decision after the controversy on Georgia's new voting law. What do you think about all that?
Boy, that's really a difficult situation. I'm very sympathetic because I know all that goes in to scheduling a game, all the planning that happens, all the local businesses that are involved. And of course, I know what it means to fans. And remember, I was running the Braves when we had our last AllStar Game in the year 2000. So I'm very sympathetic because of that. Also, I'm sympathetic. Remember, we lost an AllStar Game. We had one taken away just last year for different reasons, obviously, because of COVID. But again, I understand exactly how difficult that is. I was not privy to the decision. My read on it is that people thought the game was going to be politicized, and that's not good for players. That's not good for anyone. But I will say this I know for a fact, from the commissioner on down, everyone in baseball has enormous respect for the Braves organization, for Braves fans, for Spectacular Truist Park, and the whole Battery complex. And in fact, and that's why they put a game there in the first place. And I don't know what the future holds. I can't predict the future, but I do know nothing has changed about the regard Major League Baseball has for both the Braves organization and all of the Braves fans.
Thanks for that, Stan. Let's talk a little bit about ownership, because you're technically a part owner of the Dodgers, and there's been an effort in Major League Baseball to diversify ownership, to do some things there. Explain the Dodger ownership situation, I think, and then kind of give us your thoughts on where baseball's going there.
We have guys I call my partners, starting with Mark Walter, who was the head of Guggenheim Partners in Chicago. His partner, Todd Bowley, Bobby Patton, someone you may have heard of named Magic Johnson, Billie Jean King, and a few other limited partners. And we came together early, starting with me and Mark. And we were first pursuing the Astros because that's what was available at the time that we were looking at teams. And then the LA team was going to become available. And I went to Mark and I told him that, and we both agreed that, whoa, this is a horse of a different color. You don't get an opportunity to be associated, much less own, a world-class iconic franchise like the Dodgers very often. Most people never. And so we decided to put everything else aside and pursue the Dodgers. We knew our partners would be fine with it, but I did tell him this. If we're going to LA, there's one person you have to meet because he would be perfect to join us, and that was Magic, whom I knew from my NBA days. I had offered Magic the Hawks coaching job earlier in my life. And
wait a minute, let me stop you there. Why didn't he take it? Was it you?
No, it was because he hated being a coach. Later on, and we've talked about this many times, later on, he did it as a favor to Jerry Buss, the owner of the Lakers. He coached, I think, for 19 games. He said it was the most miserable 19 days of his life. He hated it. He wanted nothing to do with it. He did it as a favor, but he got out as fast as he could. So yes, your theory that it was because of me is a plausible theory. It just doesn't happen to be the case in this case, because he did finally join up with me. I need to bring a billionaire with me, but when I did, he joined right up.
Okay, hey, I'm seeing some great questions in the chat, so I'm gonna give you a couple of those. These are from folks who are watching. Baseball has changed so much in recent years. What changes do you like, and which concern you?
I think it evolves like everything evolves. You know, I was in the NBA before we had this horrible thing called the three-point shot, and now we can't imagine it without it. I was in the NBA before we had foreign players, okay? In fact, all of us at the Hawks were at the forefront of bringing in international players. Imagine the NBA today without international players. So baseball will continue to go through evolutions. We all know that there has been a rapid expansion of analytical capabilities in baseball. It has changed the game for sure. Some ways for better, some ways not for better. We're always looking at that. And as you know, this year in particular, we have put a lot of effort into experimenting with rule changes going forward. All through the minor leagues this year, we have experiments going on with how we might tweak our game going forward. But the basics of the game, I think, aren't going to change. The basics of the game remains as popular or more popular than ever. We continue to have more attendees in our game than the other sports put together. We're very proud of that, and we think that's going to continue.
Okay, so here's one, and we're probably getting into some nitty gritty here, but the collective bargaining agreement, this is one of our questions, expires after the season. What do you think will happen? Where will that's the agreement with the union for the people unfamiliar with that. So
look, I think that the game, except for the last 2 years, let's call, which have been brutal for ownership, just brutal. Other than that, the game has been very successful, good for owners and for players. Because of that, I think we'll be able to build on that. And yeah, there'll be some gnashing of teeth, and there'll be some saber rattling that happens in labor. But I'm confident that, I don't know if it'll be on day one or day 100 of the off season, if not before. I'm confident we'll have a deal like we have for the last 25 years. We've always made deals. Sometimes it's been at the 11th hour, sometimes before, but I'm confident we will find a way to reach a deal, because reaching a deal is the only thing that works for both sides, and both sides have a vested interest in keeping this really good thing going.
We're jumping around a little bit, but this is a great question from our chat. And it comes from my buddy Joe Bankoff. So, Joe, I can't see it, but it's good to see your name. What did you learn working for Ted Turner?
I think what characterized Ted is a willingness to take big gambles. If you've done your work, if you've thought it through. Now, we took big gambles. Not all of them worked. But I think when I started there, I think it was 6 weeks before we did something funky, which was turning on this thing called the Superstation. That worked really well, but it was quite controversial at the time. A young Terry McGurk and we had the privilege of going to the first Major League Owners meeting where we described to these owners this wonderful innovation of the Superstation, which was, by the way, going to bring our games into your markets. That wasn't all that popular, but Ted knew it was the right thing to do. Ted was willing to take those gambles. It was a very entrepreneurial environment. That was good for me because I think that fit with my particular mindset. I think all of us who were there, who had success at Turner Broadcasting during those days, fit in well with an entrepreneurial spirit, and being unafraid of taking big gambles for a big payoff, I think characterizes all of Ted's life.
So I had another question, and I want to combine it with one I was hoping to ask, which is fostering an interest in baseball among kids or younger people. How do you think about that? I mean, you hear the common complaints about games being late, especially the World Series on TV and all that. And then we also know kids now have so many choices in the games they play. When we were kids, I mean, there were just a couple. We played a lot of baseball, all that. How do you think about it as an executive?
I got to tell you, I think this is where baseball has its greatest opportunities going forward, and why I'm more optimistic about baseball's future success than all the other sports. The continuous action sports, basketball, hockey, where there is no break in the action, that is not how younger fans consume sports. We're all of us, even us older fans, when we're watching a game, we're doing it with a second screen, with our phone, or a third screen, with an iPad on our laptop or something, right? And we can't tell fans how they should consume us. We have to provide our product in a way that they want to consume it. And so what's the advantage baseball has? Here's what it is. We have 300 discrete breaks in the action every night. The 20 seconds or so between every pitch is something that will work if we are smart about how we program these breaks in the action, whether it's through highlights or chatting or texting, maybe it's gambling, whatever it is. If we are smart about engaging fans in these breaks in the action in a way that speaks to them, in a way that works for them, in a way that they are used to consuming sports, I think our future is unlimited. And I think it is a real advantage that we have going forward over all the other sports.
You mentioned gambling, and of course, traditionally, that was a huge problem in sports. I was in Ohio during the whole Pete Rose fiasco, but now it's very different. And in fact, the pro sports franchises in Atlanta are very much in support of, I guess you call it it's not the kind of gambling we're used to. So talk about the role with this kind of micro gambling in-game online stuff and where you see that going.
Well, it has been going on, whether it was fantasy, which was legal, or illegal gambling. It's been going on forever. Many people attribute the outsized success of the NFL to gambling. So it's going on. And the notion has been over the last few years that if we could at least take it in-house, make sure everything we did was clean about it, that would be a much better experience for fans, a safer, more honest experience for fans, as well as helping teams generate revenue, helping players get additional revenue. So it would work for everyone. So over the last few years, every jurisdiction has taken its time permitting gambling. In California, it is still not allowed. Right now, the only gambling in California is on Indian reservation casinos. But we think it's coming. We think it's coming as it has been coming in jurisdictions around the country. So we think our ability to stay involved and regulate it and control it and make sure that it is kept honest and above board will benefit everyone. So I think all of us in baseball are looking forward to the time when it becomes consistent for all teams in all markets.
Okay, so here's a question you might be able to have a little fun with, because I know a little bit of the answer.
Yeah, this hasn't been fun at all, so thank you for that. That'd be great.
This is from the chat. Did you work with Bob Hope? And if so, was Bob Hope as good as he says he was? He's one of the more high-profile members of our club.
Well, first of all, no one could be as good as Bob says he was. Okay, so let's make sure we all get that. But listen, the two guys I remember meeting my very first day on my very first job right out of law school, Ted Turner walked me down the hall and introduced me to two guys. One was Bob Hope, the other was Terry McGurk. I've known those guys since my very first day on my very first job. Bob was, of course, a crazy man as a promotional guy. He's made a lifetime doing it. But my favorite from that year, well, I won't talk about my favorite because not everything is safe for all audiences. But my second favorite was the day that he had a pregame wedding on the field with players holding their bats, forming a canopy. Afterwards, because we were involved with wrestling at TBS, we had 3 wrestling matches. And Bob called that Headlock and Wedlock Day. You can't get better than that. That's the essence of who Bob Hope was. And he hasn't changed. He's still that same guy.
Well, you'll be glad to know that my Irish setter is so interested in this conversation. He's joined us, and I'm not sure how much more time we have, but I'm going to keep going with questions because I've got all kinds of things to ask you about. How do you feel about last year's championship in the odd season that it was? Do you think you'll have to live with an asterisk always, or how do you feel about that?
Okay. I have many answers to this question. I'm very happy with the end result of last year's championship. I thought that worked out just fine. But it was an unimaginable crucible. All of us, all of the teams had to endure just to get to the regular season, much less the postseason. As far as the championship goes, all I know is no team has ever had to win more games in the postseason than us to win the championship. And as a final note, I will say, if you go through a season, if you go through the postseason, if you win the postseason, it's always justified. It's always well-deserved, unless you cheat. But that's just me.
Okay, you brought it up, the cheat thing. I mean, the whole controversy in particular with the Astros. I mean, what's your take on that? I mean, and did baseball handle it in the way it should have?
I think it was very tough. It was very tough to do. I don't want to replow that ground. It's been covered so much. We'll never know everything that happened then, but I'm willing to let the results stand, and I'm willing to move on as baseball has done, and I think that's the right thing to do.
Okay, so you do in the end. It started out with the Hawks. What are your thoughts on their rebuild, their win last night, and where they're headed?
I mean, what they've done since the break, and especially since the coaching change, has been extraordinary. Going up and winning in Madison Square Garden, that's always fun, but to do it in dramatic fashion like last night, that's great. As you know, I'm a big fan of the franchise. I'm a big fan of Steve Koonin. I see Tony Ressler out here from time to time. He comes to our game, so I'm certainly pulling for them. And based on how they've played for the last 2 months, you can't rule them out for anything. Anything is possible as well as they've played.
You anticipated a question we got about whether you know Tony and how much the two of you talk, and how far do you think the Hawks can go?
I think they can go all the way. And I don't know that they will, but I think what we've seen the last 2 months is that you can't rate them off any night for any opponent. They need to stay healthy, and all teams have to do that. And they've had their own problems with that this year. But if they're coming into the playoffs relatively healthy, and if that stays that way, they'll be good against any opponent any night. I do see Tony from time to time. Other people in my group know Tony even better than I do because they're all in the world of finance. But Tony's a Dodger fan. When he's out here, he comes to games. He's a great guy to talk to. He has invited me to come see the new development that they're planning in the Gulch. I've been with Steve Koonin, not in the last 2 years, but the first year of their transformation of what was Phillips Arena and now State Farm Arena. So they're doing great things, and I think they're great owners for the Hogs and great for the city of Atlanta.
So I've got a question from Wanya Lucas, which I think is someone you might know.
I do know Wanya. Yeah, I love Wanya. Yeah.
So she asks about how the game can attract more, I guess, African-American players, and I assume African-American fans. It's really a question I think a lot of people have now in terms of when they look at the teams and they look at the stadiums.
There has been a lot of attention, a lot more attention over the last year with all the social justice developments, particularly the heartbreaking developments. As Wanya knows, working with Ruby, we had a program 30 years ago called a Minority Internship Program. And the person who's leading baseball's efforts now at the commissioner's office was someone who came through our internship program. So I'm very proud of the work we've done, but it has been a need for that long and continues to be a need. We have just hired a new DEI vice president, diversity, equity, and inclusion. Many teams are doing this. There's more of a focus on that than there has ever been. And so we are determined to make progress on both fronts. We want to increase the diversity in the front offices, but we also want to increase it on the field. Now, diversity on the field is a tricky thing because what has happened in the last decade, yes, African-American participation in the major leagues has dropped a little, but the other side of that is international development has exploded, Latin America, et cetera, et cetera. So we are continuing to work on these things. No one is taking this for granted. I think we all know we need to do better. We can do better. And all of our teams, and I would say really mostly in the last year, I've seen more progress on these issues than I have ever before because of the renewed concern with social justice issues. So I am more optimistic about these things than I have been during any other time in my career.
So Wanya's dominating our chat here, Stan. And here's another question from her. As a brand builder, what do you think is generationally different today, building a franchise versus in the past? And by the way, my mom, Ruby, says hello.
Yes, she does. She's Ruby. One of the other guy I met my first day on the job was Bill Lucas, her dad, who was our GM at the time. Who was, I don't know if we called him GM, but he really was the first African American GM. The difference today, and this will really speak to you, Kevin, is the advent of social media. It's a way that, forgive me for saying this, Kevin, but newspapers don't hold the same sway that they once did. I don't wake up in fear of what the local columnist might be writing today. I just don't, because it doesn't affect my business or my customers in a way that it used to because of social media, because I can reach my customers directly with whatever my message is. And there's no company today of any size or with any success that doesn't have a robust social media strategy. I think that has changed a lot of the things we do on every level across the board. And I will say this, since this call started, which was about an hour ago, there's been a new platform that we haven't heard yet. That's how fast things are changing. I think it's mostly for the better. It's not always for the better. I'm still kind of hoping Twitter's a fad, but I'm about to give that up. I think in general, these things are good developments.
Okay. So we don't have too much more time, maybe a couple more questions. How did the Braves dominate for so long? I mean, what's explaining that as the man who is more or less in the middle of it?
We had, well, as I said, this goes back, this is a very, very long story, but when Ted asked me to take over, we had, as I told you, we had a horrible, horrible team for years, and I didn't want to do it. For 2 years, Ted was asking me to take it over until one day he just said, no, now you're doing it. Ted and I always had this understanding. When he and I disagreed on something, we just did things his way, and that's how I became president of the Braves. But after about 30 days of examining things, I went in and I told him what was wrong, that because TBS, which was the engine driving our train, needed revenue, and the ad boys always wanted that year's hot free agent, whether he was good or bad, to sell ads. I told Ted that was taking us farther away from our goal instead of closer. And after I finished, Ted stopped me actually halfway and said, I don't need a lecture. Just fix it. Just go do it. And when he said that, he meant it. Unlike a lot of places, I didn't have a secret formula. Everyone knows how to build something long-term, but I had a secret ingredient. And that was an owner who really meant it when he said, do it right, make it last long-term. Here are the resources you need. And that was the key to everything. When he put us on a track, when he allowed us, Bobby, me, and everyone else who was there, to put us on a track to be good for a long time, that was the difference. Now, did I know it would result in 14 years of divisions? I didn't know that, but I thought we were going to be good, and I thought we were going to be good for a long time. I thought we would compete for a long time, and we certainly did.
Yeah, it's quite a story. All right, real quick, I know Cannon's going to be coming back on here. Your favorite baseball player of all time?
It would have to be, if it's not Dale, and I was there at the heartbreaking time that we had to trade him. Dale was certainly probably anyone's favorite, but all my guys who are in the Hall of Fame, I was there for all of their inductions. Tommy, Greg, John, Chipper, and not to mention Bobby and John Sherholz. But also we had players along the way. We had so many great kids, so many great people. Lemke, Blauser, Javi Lopez, Eddie, our backup catcher, whose name is I'm blanking on it at the moment. We had so many great players on that team that stayed with us for a very long time, stayed with us for a whole career. And it was just a joy to be with all of them. Now, having said that, I had great players that I'm very fond of in Washington. And of course here, I have gotten to work with single name guys, from Vin to Tommy to Sandy to Oral, on a daily basis. And it's been a real thrill and a real joy. It's hard to pick out just one because all of it has been kind of a dream come true.
I tell you what, that was an amazing interview. Stan, thanks so much. I mean, your love of the game is so clear and it's legendary, and your insights on leadership are amazing. And Kevin, you did just a wonderful job, not only asking your own questions, but integrating our questions from the audience and just all the questions we would want to ask. So very well done. Just as a closing question, I mean, baseball is such a human game, through the years, just all the human stories and everything. And yet technology is changing things. Are there any interesting technologies that you see that are interesting to you today that may change the game a little bit and make it a little bit better in terms of swings, in terms of pitch speeds? Or is it always going to be a human game and technology?
We see all of that in terms of our training, both on the pitching side and the hitting side. I think a technology that we're all curious about. And will it change the game, and will that change me for the better or not for the better? And that is, will there be robo-umps in our future? I don't know the answer to that. I think there's a lot of clamor for it. I think there are pluses and minuses, but I'm curious, and we're doing some experiments now with it. I'm curious to see if that improves our game, if it speeds up our game, if it makes our game more accurate. I think that would be to the benefit. I think there are potential drawbacks, and that's why we have to study it carefully. But that's one thing I'm curious about going forward.
Well, it's going to make for an interesting future, but baseball is an immortal game, and you have made it further immortal for us. So thank you very much for being with us.
My pleasure. Thanks, guys.
Program. Thank you.
Thanks, Dan.